The wind came
Come on,
down
stay
from
with
the
me.
Sierra Nevada
It
that
hurts so
Thursday
much.
evening,
Keep
carrying
moving,
with
I've got
it the
your
smell
back.
of sage
Almost there.
and the promise of winter.
They're getting closer.
It swept
Hold
through
steady.
the
Don't
streets
shoot
of
unless they spot
Redemption
us.
Gulch,
I see that.
rattling the wooden signs outside
We have
the
to go
assayer's
now!
office,
No, we
and the
stay.
general
Please listen
store
to me.
They'll kill us
selling
all.
tumbleweeds
Better than
rolling
running.
past the saloon, where men drank
Hold
to
steady,
forget,
man. No one
and the
fires
church
unless I
where
give
they
the
prayed
word.
to remember.
Wagons advance, flanks, come to the
Higher
sides.
up on the hill
on my mark.
overlooking the town, the convent of St. Catherine stood like a sentinel against the darkening sky. It was a modest building, whitewashed adobe walls, and a small bell tower. Nothing grand by Eastern standards. But here in Nevada Territory in the year 1881, it was a beacon of something rare mercy without condition. Inside the infirmary, Sister Agnes O'Malley held the hand of a dying man. His name was Ezra Hendricks, and he had spent 40 years pulling silver from the earth. Now the earth was claiming him back one labored breath at a time. His skin had taken on the gray pallor that Agnes knew too well, the color of a soul preparing to depart. "You are not alone, Mr. Hendricks," she said softly, her thumb tracing circles on his weathered knuckles. "I am here." The old miner's eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain and something else. Fear, perhaps, or regret. "Sister Ma," he whispered, his voice like wind through dry leaves. "I need to confess. Before I go, I need to—" Agnes leaned closer. Her face, framed by the black and white of her habit, was composed. Professional. She had done this hundreds of times over 15 years, sat with the dying as they wrestled with their final moments. She knew the rhythms of death as intimately as she knew her morning prayers. "I will call Mother Superior," she said gently. "She will send for Father Dominic." "No time," Hendricks gasped. "Please, just let me tell you. Let me—" Agnes shook her head, though her heart ached to give him what he wanted. "I cannot hear your confession, Mr. Hendricks. Only a priest has that authority. That is the rule." The rule, always the rule. She had built her life on rules since coming to this convent 20 years ago. Rules told her when to wake and when to sleep. Rules told her when to pray and when to work. Rules kept the chaos at bay, kept the memories from crawling up out of the dark places where she had buried them. "But I can stay with you," she added, squeezing his hand. "I can pray with you. You are not alone." A gunshot shattered the evening silence. Agnes's head snapped toward the window. In the distance, she could see the lights of Redemption Gulch flickering in the darkness. Another shot. Then the thunder of hooves growing louder. Hendricks did not react. Perhaps he was too far gone to hear, or perhaps the sounds of violence meant nothing to a man standing at death's door. The hooves stopped outside the convent. Boots hit the ground. Fists pounded against the heavy wooden door with enough force to rattle the crucifix on the wall. Agnes rose, but before she could move toward the door, it burst open. Two men stood in the entrance, silhouettes against the starless night. Between them, they carried a third man, his arms draped over their shoulders, his feet dragging across the floor. Blood dripped from him, leaving a dark trail on the worn wooden planks. "He is dying," one of the men said. "Help him." Agnes assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 3 years on Civil War battlefields. The wounded man was unconscious, his shirt soaked crimson. His face was pale, too pale, the color of candle wax, and she recognized him. The wanted posters had been nailed to every fence post and telegraph pole between Virginia City and Carson City for years. The face staring up at her, now slack with unconsciousness, was the same face that promised a $5,000 reward. Thomas Rourke. Black Tom, they called him. The most wanted outlaw in Nevada Territory. "This man is a murderer," Agnes heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, as if someone else were speaking. "A wanted criminal." One of the men, the taller one with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, pulled a revolver from his belt and pointed it at Agnes's chest. "You are going to save his sister, or this convent burns tonight." The world seemed to narrow to the dark circle of that gun barrel. Agnes could smell the powder, the oil, the metallic promise of death. She had smelled it before long ago in a different life. "That will not be necessary." The voice came from behind Agnes, calm and steady as a prayer. Mother Superior Magdalene emerged from the shadows, her cane tapping against the floor with each measured step. She was 68 years old, her face a map of wrinkles earned through decades of service, but her eyes were clear and unafraid. She walked past Agnes, past the gun, and stopped directly in front of the two men. "You will lower that weapon in my house," she said. It was not a request. The scarred man hesitated. His partner, shorter and younger with nervous eyes, shifted his weight from foot to foot. "We do not have time for this," the shorter one hissed. "Tom is dying." Mother Superior turned her attention to the wounded man still hanging between them. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Bring him inside," she said. "Sister Agnes is the finest healer in this territory. She will do what can be done." Mother Agnes started, but a single raised hand silenced her. "The sanctuary of this convent does not ask who deserves mercy, child. It asks who needs it." The words hung in the air, heavy as incense. Agnes felt them settle into her bones, uncomfortable and true. The two men carried Thomas Rourke into the infirmary and laid him on the empty bed beside Ezra Hendricks. The dying miner did not stir. Perhaps he was already gone, or perhaps death had granted him a small mercy, allowing him to slip away while attention was elsewhere. Mother Superior gestured toward the door. "You will leave now." The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "We are not going anywhere until Tom is on his feet." "You will leave," Mother Superior repeated. "Because you know what happens to men who harm a house of God. Even men like you believe in something. And you will not risk your immortal souls, not when there is no need." She stepped closer to him, her cane clicking on the floor. Despite her age, despite her frailty, there was something in her bearing that made the outlaw take a step back. "We will return for him," the scarred man said finally. 2 days. He better be breathing. He will be in God's hands, as are we all." The two men exchanged glances. Then without another word, they turned and left their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Moments later, Agnes heard hooves pounding away into the night. In the silence that followed, she realized Ezra Hendricks had stopped breathing. She went to him, checked his pulse, closed his eyes. Another soul delivered to judgment. She whispered a prayer for him, the words automatic after so many years. Then she turned to face the other patient, Thomas Rourke. Blood continued to seep from the wound in his side, staining the thin mattress beneath him. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Without intervention, he would be dead before sunrise. "Will you help him?" Mother Superior asked. Agnes looked at the man on the bed. She thought of the wanted posters, the reports of stagecoach robberies and murdered deputies. She thought of the rule that said she should call the sheriff, turn this man over to justice. Then she thought of the rule that said she should heal the sick without condition, without judgment. "I will do what I can," she said. She worked through the night. The bullet had entered Thomas Rourke's left side just below the ribs. By some miracle, it had missed his vital organs, but it had carved a deep channel through muscle and tissue before lodging against his hip bone. Agnes extracted it using forceps she had sterilized in the kitchen fire, her hands steady despite the hour, despite the identity of her patient. She had learned surgery in the field hospitals of the Civil War, where there was never enough chloroform and always too many wounded. She had held men down while doctors sawed through bone. She had closed wounds with needle and thread while shells exploded overhead. This was nothing compared to that. And yet, as she worked, she could not help but study the face of the man before her. Even unconscious, even drained of blood, Thomas Rourke possessed a strange magnetism. His features were sharp, almost harsh, a strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least once, dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. He was perhaps 45 old for an outlaw, old for anyone who lived by the gun, but it was his mouth that drew her attention. Even in unconsciousness, there was a set to it, a stubbornness. This was a man who did not surrender easily. By 3 in the morning, the surgery was complete. Agnes had cleaned the wound, removed the bullet, and sewn the torn flesh together with careful stitches. She had packed the wound with fresh linen and administered what laudanum the convent kept for emergencies. Now all that remained was to wait. She sat beside his bed as the hours passed, watching his chest rise and fall. She should have been praying. She should have been resting, gathering her strength for the day ahead. Instead, she found herself thinking. 20 years she had been at this convent. 20 years since the war ended, since Michael died, since she had fled the world and all its cruelty. She had built a life here, a purpose. She healed the sick, comforted the dying, served God with her hands and her heart. And yet, there were nights still when the dreams came. Nights when she was back at Antietam, kneeling in mud that was more blood than earth, holding the hand of a man who was not her patient, but her beloved. Michael Brennan with his laughing eyes and his plans for their future. Michael who had taken a Confederate bow while she was 50 yards away, tending to someone else. She had been following the rules that day too. The triage rules, the ones that said you treated the most savable patients first. A man with a leg wound came before a man with a chest wound. It was mathematics, cold and logical. She had saved 3 men that hour, and she had lost the one who mattered most. By the time she reached Michael, he was already fading. His eyes found hers and his lips moved, trying to form words she would never hear. She had broken every rule then, abandoning her station to hold him as he died. But it was too late. He slipped away before he could tell her whatever final truth he had needed to share. Agnes had carried that failure with her ever since. It was why she clung so tightly to the rules now. If she had followed the rules, Michael would still have died, but at least she would not have spent the rest of her life wondering what he had wanted to say. Rules were clean. Rules did not leave you haunted. But rules had not saved Michael. And rules would not save Thomas Rourke. She looked at the outlaw, at the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was still alive. For now, that would have to be enough. Morning came with the sound of bells. Agnes emerged from the infirmary to find the convent stirring to life around her. 6 nuns lived within these walls, each with her own duties and devotions. Sister Martha, the eldest at 73, was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Sister Catherine and Sister Bernadette were laying out the altar for morning prayers. And Sister Ruth, the youngest at 28, was crossing the courtyard with an armful of firewood. Ruth stopped when she saw Agnes emerge from the infirmary. "You were up all night," Ruth said. It was not a question. There was work to be done. "The patient, will he live?" Agnes hesitated. "God willing." Ruth studied her for a moment, her dark eyes curious. Ruth was different from the other sisters. She had come to the convent only 3 years ago, fleeing a past she rarely spoke of. Before she had taken her vows, she had sung in saloons from San Francisco to Virginia City, entertaining minors and gamblers with songs that were not fit for a house of God. There were rumors, whispers about what else she might have done in those years. But whatever Ruth's past, she had embraced her new life with fervor. She prayed with intensity, worked without complaint, and asked questions that made the other sisters uncomfortable. "You look troubled," Ruth said now. "I'm tired." "Nothing more." "If you say so, sister." Agnes moved past her toward the kitchen, but Ruth's voice followed her. "Mother Superior said we have a new patient, a man with a gunshot wound. She did not say who he was." Agnes kept walking. "It is not our place to ask." The morning passed in routine. Agnes checked on Thomas Rourke twice, finding him still unconscious but stable. His fever had risen slightly, which was to be expected. She changed his bandages, administered more laudanum, and returned to her other duties. At noon, she sat in the kitchen, forcing herself to eat the simple meal of bread and broth that constituted lunch. She had not slept in over 30 hours, but sleep seemed impossible now. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of the outlaw, peaceful in unconsciousness. She saw the blood on her hands, felt the slick warmth of it as she worked. And she saw Michael. Always in the end, she saw Michael. Sister Martha lowered herself onto the bench across from Agnes, her joints creaking with age. She was a small woman, thin as a reed, and she ate little. Agnes had noticed this, had worried about it. Today, Martha's portion of bread sat untouched on her plate. Agnes glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then quickly she reached across the table and slid her own bread onto Martha's plate. Martha looked up, startled. "Child, what are you doing?" "Eating too much leads to sloth," Agnes said, keeping her voice light. "I am doing you a favor by sharing the burden." Martha's weathered face creased into a smile. "You think I do not see through you, Agnes O'Malley. You think I do not know what you do. I do not know what you mean." "Of course not." Martha patted Agnes's hand with fingers gnarled by arthritis. "You are a good woman, even when you try to hide it." From across the kitchen, Ruth watched this exchange with quiet attention. When Agnes's eyes met hers, Ruth smiled small and knowing, then looked away. The afternoon brought visitors. Sheriff Daniel Holloway rode up to the convent just as the sisters were finishing their midday prayers. He was a large man, 60 years old, with a white mustache and the bearing of someone who had spent his life in authority. Before retiring to this backwater posting, he had been a United States Marshal hunting outlaws across half the Western territories. Agnes met him at the door. "Sister Agnes," Holloway said, tipping his hat. "Hope I am not interrupting." "We have just concluded prayer, Sheriff. What brings you here?" Holloway glanced past her toward the infirmary. "Routine check. We have had reports of trouble up near Virginia City. Rourke's devils, they call themselves." led by Black Tom Rourke. You might have seen the posters. Agnes kept her face neutral. I tend to the sick sheriff. I do not have time for wanted posters. Course not, course not. Holloway shifted his weight, his leather creaking. Thing is, sister word has it they might be planning something big. Shipment coming through on Saturday, gold from the Comstock load, $200,000 worth. That is a great deal of money. Enough to kill for, enough to die for. He fixed her with a steady gaze. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you send word. Understand? Of course, Sheriff. Good, good. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. How is the old miner Hendricks? He passed last night, peacefully, I hope. Sorry to hear that. He was a good man once upon a time. Holloway tipped his hat again. I will leave you to your work, sister. God bless. Agnes watched him mount his horse and ride back toward town. Her heart was pounding, though her face betrayed nothing. Thomas Rourke lay not 50 feet away, separated from the sheriff by nothing more than a wooden door in Agnes's silence. She could have spoken. She could have said 3 words, he is here. The sheriff would have taken Rourke into custody, and Agnes would have been free of this burden. The rules of the law were clearer, perhaps, than the rules of the church. But she said nothing. Back in the infirmary, Thomas Rourke had opened his eyes. He was still weak, still pale, but consciousness had returned. His gaze tracked Agnes as she entered the room, sharp and assessing despite his condition. A nun, he said. His voice was a rasp, dry from hours without water. Of all the people to save me. Agnes said nothing. She poured water from a clay pitcher and brought it to his lips, supporting his head as he drank. He swallowed greedily, then fell back against the pillow, exhausted by even that small effort. You are Irish, he said. It was not a question. As are you. County Cork, she did not answer. Instead, she checked his bandages, noting with satisfaction that the bleeding had stopped. The wound was clean, the stitches holding. He would live, barring infection. I am from Galway myself, Rourke continued, as if they were making casual conversation. Came over in '52 with my family. The famine, you know. Agnes knew. The Great Famine had driven her own family from Cork when she was 18. Half of them had died on the ship over, and the other half had scattered across America like seeds in the wind. She had not seen any of them in over 30 years. I did not save you for conversation, Mr. Rourke. He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. No, I imagine you did not. Your men said they would return in 2 days. Until then, you are my patient, nothing more. Rourke studied her with those sharp eyes. You know who I am. I know what the posters say. And yet you did not call the sheriff. I heard him, you know, out there asking about trouble. You could have turned me in. Agnes felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. I am not here to judge you, Mr. Rourke. I am here to heal you. What happens after that is between you and God. God. Rourke turned his face toward the ceiling, and something shifted in his expression. The sharpness faded, replaced by something else. Weariness, perhaps, or something deeper. I need a priest. Father Dominic comes once a month. He will be here Saturday. I might not have until Saturday. Agnes straightened, smoothing her habit. Then I suggest you hold on, Mr. Rourke. I did not spend the night saving your life, only to have you die before receiving the sacraments. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Sister. She paused, not looking back. Thank you for not turning me in, for all of it. She did not respond. She walked out of the infirmary, closing the door quietly behind her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of exhaustion. Agnes went through the motions of her duties, cleaning the kitchen, tending the small vegetable garden behind the convent, leading the sisters in evening prayers. But her mind was elsewhere, circling endlessly around the man in the infirmary and the knowledge she carried. A gold shipment, $200,000. Saturday. Thomas Rourke knew something. That much was clear. His men had brought him here wounded, had threatened to burn the convent if Agnes did not save him. Why? Because they needed him alive for something. For the robbery, perhaps. But if Rourke was the leader, why was he here half dead while his men went on without him? Something did not add up. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the desert air turned cold, Agnes returned to the infirmary. She told herself it was to check his bandages to make sure the wound was not infected. But in truth, she was looking for answers. Rourke was awake, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was easier now, his color slightly improved. When Agnes entered, he turned his head to look at her. "Come to save my soul, sister. I told you that is the priest's job. And if the priest does not come in time..." Agnes sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair she had occupied through the long night. "Then I suppose you will have to make your peace with God directly. You make it sound easy. I make it sound necessary." Rourke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, stripped of its usual sardonic edge. "I have done things, sister. Things that would make your blood curdle if you knew. I do not need to know. But you want to. I can see it in your eyes. You are trying to figure me out, trying to decide if I am worth saving." Agnes met his gaze steadily. "It is not my place to decide who is worth saving. That is God's domain. And what does God say about murderers, about thieves, about men who have built their lives on blood and vengeance? He says that salvation is possible for anyone who truly repents. Do you believe that?" The question hung in the air between them. Agnes thought of Michael, of the men she had watched die during the war, of the endless parade of sinners and saints who had passed through this infirmary over the years. She thought of her own sins, the pride that kept her rigid, the fear that kept her cold. "I believe," she said slowly, "that the capacity for redemption is what separates us from beasts. Whether we choose to embrace it is another matter entirely." Rourke studied her for a long moment. Then he turned his face away. "You sound like my mother," he said quietly. "She believed too. Right up until the railroad men burned our home and left her to die." Agnes said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I need a priest," Rourke said again. "I need to confess. Not to God, not yet. First to someone who will listen, who will understand what I have done and why I did it. I cannot hear your confession. I am not ordained." "Then just listen. Not as a confessor, as a witness." Agnes thought of the rules, the clear, clean rules that told her what she could and could not do. A nun could not hear confession. A nun could not grant absolution. These were the laws of the church, immutable and ancient. But the rules said nothing about listening to a dying man's story. "Very well," she said. "I will listen." Rourke closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was distant, as if he were speaking from a long way away. "There is a shipment coming through Redemption Gulch on Saturday. Gold from the Comstock load. $200,000 guarded by 15 men. Agnes's breath caught in her throat. "My brother Patrick is leading the Devils now. They are going to hit that shipment at Devil's Pass, 3 miles north of town. They are going to kill everyone. Patrick does not leave witnesses. He never has." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples outward, disturbing everything. "I tried to stop it," Rourke continued. "That is why I rode ahead. I was going to warn someone, anyone. But Silas, one of my own men, he shot me before I could get clear. Loyalty, he called it, keeping me from betraying the crew." Agnes found her voice. "Why are you telling me this?" Rourke opened his eyes and looked at her. In his gaze, she saw something she had not expected. Exhaustion, yes. Pain, certainly. But beneath it all, something that looked almost like hope. "Because someone needs to know, because 15 men are going to die on Saturday if no one stops it. And because..." He paused, swallowing hard. "Because I am tired, sister. Tired of the blood, tired of the vengeance. I have been running on hate for 13 years, and I do not know who I am without it." Agnes sat frozen in her chair. The information he had given her was a burden she had not asked for, had not wanted. It changed everything. It changed nothing. If what Rourke said was true, then 15 innocent men would die in 2 days. If she told the sheriff, she could save them. But Rourke had told her this in confidence, in what he believed was a confession. Was it protected by the seal, even though she was not a priest? Even though he had framed it as storytelling rather than confession? Proper, and if she said nothing, if she let those men die to protect a technicality, what did that make her? "You understand what you have done," Agnes said quietly. "You have placed this burden on me. I know. I cannot simply go to the sheriff. What you have told me, it was given in confidence. It may be protected. I know that too. Then why..." Why tell me at all? Rourke was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I needed someone to know that I tried. That at the end, whatever else I tried to be something better. Agnes stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the chair. She needed air. She needed space to think. She needed to be anywhere but in this room with this man and his terrible knowledge. I must go, she said. Sister. But she was already out the door, striding through the courtyard past the small garden and the well out to the edge of the convent property where the desert stretched away into darkness. She stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. The stars were coming out now, thousands of them, scattered across the sky like silver dust. In Ireland, her mother had told her that each star was a soul looking down, watching over the living. Agnes had not believed that for a long time. But tonight she found herself looking up, wondering if Michael was among them. What would you want me to do? She asked silently. What would you tell me if you could speak? The stars offered no answer. They never did. Agnes returned to the convent to find Mother Superior waiting for her in the small chapel. The old woman was kneeling before the altar, her head bowed in prayer. She did not look up when Agnes entered, but she spoke as if she had known Agnes was there all along. You are troubled, child. Agnes knelt beside her, grateful for the familiar ritual. The cold stone beneath her knees, the flickering candlelight, the faint smell of incense. These things were constant. These things were safe. I need your guidance, Mother. Then ask. Agnes chose her words carefully. If someone told me something during a fever, something dangerous, something that could save lives or cost them, is that protected by the seal? Mother Superior finally raised her head. Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, studied Agnes's face. The seal protects the confession of sin's child, not the ramblings of fever, not casual conversation. She paused. The question is, which was it? I do not know. Then that is your answer. I do not understand. Mother Superior placed a weathered hand on Agnes's shoulder. If you cannot be certain it was a confession, then you are not bound by the seal. But if it was a confession, even an informal one, then you are bound absolutely. There is no middle ground. So what do? You pray, you wait, and when the time comes, you trust that God will guide your hand. It was not the answer Agnes wanted, but perhaps it was the answer she needed. The night passed slowly. Agnes dozed in the chair beside Rourke's bed, waking periodically to check his condition. His fever rose and fell, a battle being fought inside his body that she could not see, but could only monitor. In the small hours before dawn, he began to talk in his sleep, fragments at first, names she did not recognize, places that meant nothing to her. But gradually the fragments coalesced into something coherent. He was dreaming of his brother. Patrick, he murmured, his head tossing on the pillow. Do not do this. Patrick, please. There has been enough blood. Agnes leaned closer, listening. Da is gone. Ma is gone. Vengeance will not bring them back. It will only take us two. You have to see that. You have to. He trailed off, slipping back into deeper sleep. Agnes sat back, her mind racing. Patrick, the brother who was leading the robbery, the one who never left witnesses. What had happened to these men, to this family, to fill them with so much rage? Morning came, gray and cold clouds rolling in from the mountains to blanket the sky. Agnes went about her duties mechanically, her thoughts still circling the problem she could not solve. At 8 o'clock, Ruth found her in the garden, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. You are going to uproot the carrots along with the weeds, Ruth observed. Agnes looked down at her hands, surprised to find they were shaking. She released the handful of greenery she had been clutching and sat back on her heels. I am not myself today. I had noticed. Ruth knelt beside her, heedless of the mud staining her habit. It is the patient, is it not? The one in the infirmary. Agnes said nothing. I saw his face when they brought him in, Ruth continued. I have seen wanted posters, Agnes. I know who he is. Then you know why I did not call the sheriff. I know why you think you did not call him, because of the rules. Because we give sanctuary to all who need it. Ruth paused. But I wonder if there is more to it than that. What do you mean, Tard? I mean that you are the most rigid woman I have ever met. You follow the rules like they were written by God himself. And yet here you are sheltering the most wanted outlaw in Nevada, and you have not said a word to anyone. Agnes turned to face her. What would you have me do, Ruth? Turn him over, let him hang. I would have you be honest with yourself about why you are protecting him. Is it really about the rules or is it something else? There is nothing else. Ruth shook her head slowly. You use the rules like a wall, Agnes. So you never have to feel anything. So you never have to choose. But sometimes choosing is exactly what God calls us to do. She stood brushing the mud from her knees. Just something to think about. Agnes watched her go, the words lingering in the air long after Ruth had disappeared inside. The afternoon brought a change in Thomas Rourke. When Agnes entered the infirmary to check his bandages, she found him sitting up for the first time since his arrival. His face was drawn pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear. You look better, she said. I feel worse. He shifted, wincing at the movement. But I think I might live. The Lord works in mysterious ways. So they say. He watched her as she examined the wound, her touch clinical and personal. You have been avoiding me. I have been performing my duties. Avoiding me while performing your duties, then. Agnes said nothing. She cleaned the wound, applied fresh bandages, worked with the efficiency born of long practice. But she could feel his eyes on her, could sense the questions he wanted to ask. The sheriff came back, she said finally. An hour ago. Rourke tensed. And Merhet, he asked if we had seen any strangers. I told him we had not. You lied for me. I told a careful truth. I did not see strangers. I saw men who brought a patient. Rourke laughed, a short surprise sound. You have a lawyer's mind, sister. I have a survivor's mind, Mr. Rourke. There is a difference. She finished her work and stepped back, but something in his expression made her pause. What is it? She asked. There is more than I told you last night. About the robbery, about why it matters. Agnes did not want to hear it. Every word he spoke was another weight on her conscience, another piece of knowledge she would have to carry or act upon. You should save your strength. This cannot wait. His voice was urgent now, the sardonic mask slipping away to reveal something raw beneath. The gold, the shipment, it is not just about money. Patrick, he has made contact with people, bad people, former Confederates who want to stir up trouble in the West. Agnes felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of trouble? The kind that ends with buildings burning and people dying. The gold is to finance them, to buy weapons, to recruit men. Patrick thinks he is serving our father's memory, getting revenge on the railroads and the government that let them destroy our family. But what he is really doing is starting a war. How do you know this? Because I was part of it. Until 6 months ago, I was the one making the contacts, arranging the meetings. I thought we were just robbing trains, just taking back what was owed us. But then I saw what Patrick was planning, what he really wanted. Rourke's voice dropped to a whisper. He does not want justice, Agnes. He wants blood. He wants the whole world to burn. Agnes sank into the chair beside his bed. The weight of this knowledge was crushing, too heavy to bear alone. Silas did not shoot me because I was going to warn the sheriff, Rourke continued. He shot me because Patrick ordered him to. His own brother. Patrick does not know. Silas acted on his own initiative. He told the others that I lost my nerve, that I was running. But the truth is he saw me as a threat to his position. With me out of the way, he becomes Patrick's right hand. Agnes tried to process this. If Patrick does not know Silas betrayed you, then there is still a chance. Patrick loves me. Hates me too, probably, but loves me underneath it all. If I could talk to him face to face, I might be able to stop this. But I cannot even stand. I cannot ride. I am useless. He slammed his fist against the bed frame, then gasped at the pain the movement caused. Easy, Agnes said, instinctively reaching out to steady him. You will tear your stitches. What does it matter? 15 men are going to die on Saturday. More if Patrick's plans succeed. And I am lying here helpless while it all falls apart. Agnes withdrew her hand. She looked at this man, this outlaw, this murderer, and she saw something she had not expected to see. She saw someone who wanted to be better. Someone who was trying too late to turn back from the path he had walked for so long. She saw herself. I cannot tell the sheriff what you have told me, she said slowly. If it was a confession, I am bound by the seal. If it was not, I am bound by my own conscience. Either way, I cannot betray your trust. Rourke closed his eyes. I know, but there is nothing stopping you from telling someone else. When Father Dominic arrives tomorrow, you can make a proper confession. He can advise you. He can help you decide what to do. And if I do not live until tomorrow, Agnes stood looking down at him with something that might have been compassion, might have been resolve. Then I suggest you pray, Mr. Rower. Pray that God grants you enough time to make things right. She left him there alone with his conscience and his pain. The evening passed in prayer and silence. Agnes knelt in the chapel long after the other sisters had retired, her lips moving in familiar words while her mind churned with unfamiliar thoughts. 15 men, a conspiracy, violence spreading like wildfire across the West, and one dying outlaw who might be the only person who could stop it. At 11 o'clock, she finally rose from her knees and made her way to the infirmary. She told herself it was to check on her patient to make sure he survived the night, but in truth, she could not stay away. Rourke was still awake, staring at the ceiling. Could not sleep, he asked. Could not pray. She sat in the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The men who will die if no one stops your brother. 15 good men, probably. Husbands, fathers, sons, none of them deserving what is coming. No one deserves that. Rourke turned his head to look at her. You never answered my question, you know, from before. Have you ever held a gun? Agnes was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she began to speak. I was 23 when the war started. My fiancé Michael enlisted with the Union Army. I followed him, volunteered as a nurse. I thought it would be romantic tending to wounded soldiers while the man I loved fought for a noble cause. She laughed a bitter sound. I was a fool. What happened? I saw things no one should see. Men torn apart by cannonballs. Boys dying of dysentery in their own filth, in the blood, so much blood. By the end, I could not remember what it was like to have clean hands. Rourke said nothing, just listened. There was a night early in the war. Confederate raiders attacked our field hospital. The guards were overwhelmed. A man came into the surgery tent, saw the wounded Union soldiers, and raised his rifle to finish them off. Agnes's voice grew distant, as if she were speaking from somewhere far away. I shot him. There was a pistol on the surgeon's table, and I picked it up and shot him through the heart. He was 19, maybe 20. He looked surprised when he fell, like he had not expected a woman to fight back. You saved lives. I took one. I have spent 20 years trying to forget the weight of that pistol in my hand, the kick when it fired, the smell of powder and blood. She looked at Rourke. So yes, Mr. Rourke, I have held a gun, I have killed a man, and I have spent every day since trying to atone for it. The silence stretched between them, heavy and somehow sacred. We are more alike than you know, Sister, Rourke said, finally. Perhaps, but the difference between us is that I stopped. I put down the gun, and I never picked it up again. And if you had to, if lives depended on it, Agnes did not answer. She did not know the answer. Instead, she rose from the chair and moved to the window. Outside, the clouds had parted, and the stars were visible again. Thousands of them, cold and distant and eternal. Father Dominic arrives tomorrow morning, she said. You should rest. Save your strength for confession. And if confession is not enough, then we will cross that bridge when we come to it. She turned back to face him, and something in her expression made him fall silent. Sleep, Mr. Rourke. Tomorrow we will see what God has in store for both of us. She left him there and walked out into the night. The wind had picked up, again cold and sharp, carrying the scent of snow from the mountains. Winter was coming earlier than usual. Agnes stood at the edge of the courtyard looking down at Redemption Gulch. The town was quiet now, most of its inhabitants asleep or drinking in the saloon. Peaceful almost, but she knew what was coming. The storm that would break over this place in less than 2 days. The violence that would sweep through like wildfire unless someone stopped it. And in that moment, standing alone beneath the stars, Agnes made a decision. She did not know what she would do. She did not know how she would do it. But she knew with a certainty that went deeper than rules or laws, or even faith, that she could not stand by and let innocent people die. Not again. Never again. Whatever it took, she would find a way. Back in the infirmary, Thomas Rourke stared at the ceiling and wondered if redemption was possible for a man who had spent his life in sin. He thought of his brother, of the path they had walked together into darkness. He thought of his parents, of the home they had lost, of the rage that had consumed them all. And he thought of the nun who had saved his life, who carried her own secrets and her own pain, who looked at him not with judgment, but with something that might have been understanding. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 13 years, he prayed. Outside, the wind continued to blow, carrying the scent of change. And on the road leading into Redemption Gulch, a group of riders moved through the darkness, their faces hidden, their intentions clear. Patrick Rourke had arrived. Saturday came with the smell of smoke. Not from fire, not yet, but from the saloon chimneys down in Redemption Gulch. From the breakfast fires of miners heading to early shifts, from the world waking to a day that would change everything. Agnes had not slept. She had spent the hours between midnight and dawn, kneeling in the chapel, wrestling with prayers that would not come. Now, as pale light crept through the narrow windows, she rose on aching knees and made her way to the infirmary. Thomas Rourke was awake, watching the door, as if he had been waiting for her. You look terrible," he said. "I have had better nights." She checked his bandages mechanically, her mind elsewhere. "How do you feel?" "Like a man who might live." He paused. "Father Dominic. He should arrive this morning. He usually comes before noon." Rourke nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his features. "Good. That is good." Agnes finished her examination and stepped back. The wound was healing well better than she had expected. The human body could be remarkably resilient when it chose to be. But Rourke was still weak, still pale. He would not be riding anywhere for days, perhaps weeks. "There is something else," she said. "Something you should know." Rourke's eyes sharpened. "What?" "Last night after you fell asleep, I looked out the window and saw riders coming into town. 6 of them moving together, military formation." The color drained from Rourke's face. "Patrick, I cannot be certain, but the way they moved, the discipline in their formation. These were not ordinary travelers." Rourke tried to push himself up, gasping at the pain. Agnes put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Do not be foolish. You will tear your stitches." "You do not understand. If Patrick is here, if he knows where I am." He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "You need to leave, all of you. Take the sisters and go." "We are not going anywhere, Mr. Rourke." "He will come for me. After the job, he will come. And anyone who helped me, anyone who stood between us." His voice cracked. "Patrick does not leave loose ends." Agnes gently removed his hand from her wrist. "This is a house of God, Mr. Rourke. We do not flee from danger. We face it. You do not know my brother." "No, but I know my duty." She straightened her habit, composing herself. "Father Dominic will be here soon. Make your confession. Find your peace, and let God sort out the rest." She left before he could argue further. The morning passed in fragments of normalcy. Agnes helped Sister Martha prepare breakfast. She led the sisters in morning prayers, her voice steady even as her heart raced. She worked in the garden, pulling weeds that did not need pulling, trying to occupy her hands while her mind spiraled. At 9 o'clock, Ruth found her in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with unnecessary violence. "Something is happening," Ruth said. "I can feel it." Agnes did not look up from her scrubbing. "I do not know what you mean. You have not eaten, you have barely spoken, and you keep looking toward the road as if you expect the devil himself to come riding up." Ruth crossed her arms. "What is going on, Agnes?" "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything that happens in this convent concerns me. I took the same vows you did." Agnes finally stopped scrubbing. She turned to face Ruth, and something in her expression made the younger woman take a step back. "There are things happening that I cannot explain, things that may put all of us in danger, but I am handling it." "Handling it how? By following the rules, by trusting in her, by waiting for Father Dominic." Ruth shook her head slowly. "You keep saying that, following the rules, trusting in God. But what about trusting yourself? What about making a choice? The rules exist precisely so we do not have to make choices. That is the point. Is it just easier to hide behind them than to face what you really believe?" Agnes felt her temper rising, a rare and dangerous thing. You presume too much, sister. Maybe I do, but I have seen you, Agnes. I have watched you for 3 years. You are the kindest woman in this convent, and yet you act as if kindness is a weakness to be controlled. You follow every rule to the letter, and yet you break them every day in small ways you think no one notices. What are you talking about? The bread you slip to Sister Martha when you think no one is looking. The extra blankets you leave outside the door of the homeless man who sleeps behind the church. The way you sit with the king, not because it is your duty, but because you cannot bear for them to be alone. Ruth stepped closer, her voice softening. You are not the rigid woman you pretend to be, Agnes. You are someone who cares deeply, who feels deeply. Someone who has been hurt so badly that she built walls around her heart and called them rules. Agnes felt something crack inside her, something that had been holding steady for 20 years. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying. I was like you once. I hid behind songs and smiles and the attention of men because I was afraid to be alone with myself. When I came here, I thought I could hide behind prayers instead. But God does not want us to hide, Agnes. He wants us to be brave enough to be ourselves. Before Agnes could respond, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Both women turned toward the window. A single rider was approaching the convent, his black cassock billowing behind him. Father Dominic had arrived. Father Dominic Chen was not what most people expected when they heard the words Catholic priest. He was 55 years old, Chinese by birth, with a round face and gentle eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. He had come to California as a young man, one of thousands of Chinese laborers brought in to build the Transcontinental Railroad. He had seen friends die in tunnel explosions, had watched others worked to death by foremen who saw them as less than human. And yet somehow he had found God. The story of his conversion was legendary in these parts. A Jesuit missionary had pulled him from a collapsed tunnel, had nursed him back to health, had taught him to read and write in English and Latin and Greek. Dominic had entered the seminary at 25 and had spent the 30 years since ministering to the forgotten people of the West, the miners, the immigrants, the outcasts who had no one else to turn to. He tied his horse to the post outside the convent and approached the door with the unhurried pace of a man who had learned that God's work could not be rushed. Agnes met him at the entrance. Father, you are earlier than expected. I heard there were bandits in the area. I wanted to make sure you were safe. His eyes searched her face, reading something there. But I see there is more to it than that. There is, much more. She led him inside, past the chapel, past the kitchen, where the other sisters were preparing the midday meal, to the infirmary door. You should prepare yourself, she said. For what? Agnes opened the door. Father Dominic stepped inside and stopped. His eyes moved from the bed to the man lying in it, and recognition dawned on his face. Black Tom Rourke, we have met before. Rourke turned his head, and something flickered in his expression. Father Chen, I did not expect to see you again. Nor I you, especially not in a place like this. Agnes looked between them, confused. You know each other? Dominic nodded slowly. 10 years ago, when I was still working the missions near Sacramento, there was an incident. A group of railroad workers, white men, cornered me outside a saloon. They had been drinking, and they did not appreciate a Chinese man wearing a priest's collar. He moved further into the room, his eyes never leaving Rourke's face. They were going to beat me. Perhaps kill me. And then this man appeared. I was not trying to save you, Rourke said. I just hated the railroad men more than I hated anyone else. Whatever your reasons, you stopped them. You pulled a gun in and told them to leave me alone. And when they refused you, Dominic paused. You were very convincing. I shot 2 of them. Non-fatal wounds. The rest ran. And you told me that God was wasting his time on a world this cruel. Then you rode away without another word. Rourke looked away. I remember. Dominic sat in the chair beside the bed, the same chair Agnes had occupied through so many hours of watching and waiting. Why are you here, Tom? What happened? I was shot, one of my own men. Why? Rourke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. Because I wanted to stop. Because I was riding to warn someone about what my brother was planning. Because after 13 years of blood and vengeance, I finally realized that we had become exactly what destroyed our family. Dominic leaned forward. Tell me. And Rourke told him everything. He told him about the gold shipment, about Patrick's plan to hit it at Devil's Pass. He told him about the Confederate sympathizers, about the money that would fund rebellion and chaos. He told him about Silas and the bullet that had nearly killed him. He told him about the 15 men who would die if no one stopped the robbery. And when he was finished, he asked for confession. Agnes left the room, closing the door behind her. Whatever passed between Rourke and Father Dominic in the next hour was not for her to hear. This was the seal. She understood the sacred bond between confessor and penitent that could never be broken. She went to the chapel and knelt before the altar, trying to pray. But the words would not come. All she could think about was the clock ticking down, the hours slipping away. The gold shipment would leave Virginia City at noon. It would reach Redemption Gulch by 6 in the evening. And at Devil's Pass, 3 miles north of town, Patrick Rourke and his men would be waiting. She thought about the sheriff's visit yesterday. He had asked about suspicious activity, had warned her about the Rourke's devils. She could have spoken then. She could have said 3 words, "He is here." But she had not. She thought about the rules. The seal of confession did not apply to her because she was not a priest. But it did apply to Father Dominic, and anything Rourke told him in formal confession could never be revealed. They were trapped by the very laws meant to protect them. And she thought about Michael, about Antietam, about the choice she had made 20 years ago to follow the triage rules instead of running to his side. She had saved 3 lives that hour and lost the one that mattered most. She had spent every day since then trying to make up for it by following every rule, every protocol, every guideline she could find. But what if the rules were wrong? What if there were times when breaking them was the only right thing to do? The chapel door opened. Father Dominic entered, his face grave. "I have heard his confession," he said. "I have given him conditional absolution." Conditional. On his willingness to make amends, to do whatever is in his power to stop what he started. Agnes rose to her feet. "What did he say about the robbery, about Patrick?" "You know, I cannot tell you that. The seal is absolute. But you heard what I heard. Before you arrived, he told me everything. I am not bound by the seal. I could go to the sheriff myself." Dominic studied her face for a long moment. "You could. The question is whether you should. 15 men will die, Father. How can I stay silent?" "You cannot stay silent, but neither can you betray the trust that was placed in you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There is another way." "What way?" "Rourke himself must be the one to act. He must be the one to warn the authorities, or to stop his brother directly. Only then is the seal preserved, and only then is there any hope of true redemption. He cannot even walk. He is too weak to ride. Then perhaps he needs help getting where he needs to go." Agnes stared at him, understanding dawning slowly. "You are suggesting—" "I am suggesting nothing. I am merely observing that a man who cannot walk might still be able to act if someone helped him reach the place where action was needed." Before Agnes could respond, the chapel door burst open again. Sister Ruth stood in the doorway, her face pale. "There is a man here, asking questions about a wounded stranger. He says he is just passing through, but I do not believe him." Agnes felt her blood run cold. "What does he look like?" "Tall, sandy hair, a scar on his cheek." Ruth paused. "He said his name was Silas." Agnes and Father Dominic exchanged glances. "Stay here," Agnes said. "Both of you, let me handle this." She strode out of the chapel and across the courtyard, her habit swirling around her ankles. At the front gate, she found the man Ruth had described, tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. The scar Ruth mentioned ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw, a pale line against tan skin. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Good morning, sister. I was hoping you could help me." "We help all who come to us. What do you need?" "I am looking for a friend. He was hurt a few days ago, shot during a hunting accident. Some folks in town said they saw 2 men carrying someone up this way. Thought maybe you took him in." Agnes kept her face neutral. "We receive many patients here. We are the only infirmary in the region. This friend of mine, he is older. Dark hair, going gray, strong jaw. Probably not in the best shape given the wound. I cannot discuss our patients with strangers. Surely you understand." Silas's smile faded slightly. "Of course, I was just worried about him, that is all. We have been friends for a long time. If you give me your name, I can pass along a message if we have anyone matching that description. Silas, just Silas, and you can tell him. He paused, his eyes scanning the convent grounds behind her. You can tell him his brother is looking for him, and that family should stick together. Agnes felt a chill run down her spine. I will pass that along if the opportunity arises. I appreciate that, sister. Silas tipped his hat. Nice place you have here. Be a shame if anything happened to it. He turned and walked back to his horse, mounting with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. Agnes watched him go, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she returned to the chapel, Father Dominic and Ruth were waiting. He knows, Agnes said. Or he suspects. Either way, Patrick will know by nightfall. What do we do? Ruth asked. Agnes thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 days. The wounded outlaw in her infirmary, the gold shipment on its way, the men who would die if no one stopped them, the seal of confession that bound Father Dominic, the promise she had made to herself 20 years ago to always follow the rules. And she thought about Ruth's words from that morning. What about making a choice? We need to talk to Thomas, she said, all of us. They gathered in the infirmary, the 4 of them, Agnes, Father Dominic, Ruth, and Thomas Rourke. Rourke had managed to sit up on his own, propped against the wall behind his bed. He looked better than he had that morning, some color returning to his cheeks. But he was still weak, still far from healthy. Silas was here, Agnes said. He knows you are somewhere nearby. He will tell Patrick. Rourke closed his eyes. Then it is over. It is not over. Not yet. Agnes began to pace, her mind racing. The gold shipment left Virginia City at noon. It will reach Devil's Pass by 6 o'clock. That gives us, she checked the position of the sun through the window, 5 hours. To do what? Rourke asked. I cannot ride, I can barely stand. And even if I could, what would I do? Patrick will not listen to me. You do not know that. I know my brother's sister, better than anyone alive. Once he sets his mind to something, nothing can change it. Nothing. Father Dominic spoke up. I could ride to warn the shipment myself. I am not bound by any seal if I simply report suspicious activity. No, Agnes said. If Patrick has men watching the roads, they will stop you. Or worse. Then what do you suggest? Agnes stopped pacing. She looked at Rourke, at the man who had spent 13 years spreading chaos and violence across the West. The man who had killed and stolen and terrorized. The man who had, in the end, tried to stop. We go to Devil's Pass, she said, together. The room fell silent. You cannot be serious, Ruth said. I am completely serious. Father Dominic cannot reveal what he knows. I cannot reveal what Thomas told me in confidence. But if Thomas himself confronts Patrick, if he speaks to his brother directly, then the seal is preserved and the robbery might be stopped. And how exactly do we get there? Rourke asked. I cannot ride alone. I would fall from the saddle before we cleared the town. Agnes met his eyes. Then I will take you. You ride in front, I hold you from behind. We make it work. You are a nun. I am a nurse who served in the Civil War. I have ridden through battlefields and tended wounds under enemy fire. This is not the most dangerous thing I have ever done. Rourke stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a painful sound cut short by the wound in his side, but there was something genuine in it. You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, he said, or the craziest. Perhaps both. Agnes turned to Ruth. I need you to stay here. If we do not return by nightfall, take the sisters and ride to town. Tell the sheriff everything. Everything. The seal does not bind you. You only know what you have seen and heard with your own ears. That is not confession. Ruth nodded slowly. Be careful. Father Dominic stepped forward. I should go with you. No, if Patrick's men capture a priest riding toward the ambush site, it will raise too many questions. We need to do this quietly. Then at least take this. Dominic reached into his cassock and produced a small revolver. I kept it from my days on the railroad. I have not used it in years, but it still works. Agnes looked at the gun in his hand. 20 years since she had held one. 20 years since she had sworn never to hold one again. Just in case, Dominic said. She took the revolver and tucked it into her belt beneath her habit. The weight of it was familiar, terrifying, strangely comforting. We need to go, she said. Now. Getting Thomas Rourke onto a horse was not easy. Ruth helped Agnes lift him from the bed, his arm draped over Agnes's shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, all muscle and bone, despite days of barely eating. Every step seemed to cost him enormous effort, and twice Agnes had to stop and let him catch his breath. They made it to the stable behind the convent, where the sisters kept 2 horses for supply runs and emergencies. Agnes chose the stronger of the 2, a gray mare named Mercy, who had carried her through many difficult journeys. Appropriate name, Rourke muttered as Ruth helped boost him into the saddle. Agnes mounted behind him, her arms reaching around his body to grasp the reins. His back pressed against her chest, and she could feel the heat of his fever through both their clothes. Ruth handed up a canteen of water and a small bag of bread. God go with you. He had better, Agnes said. We will need all the help we can get. She kicked Mercy into motion and they rode out from behind the convent, heading north toward Devil's Pass. The desert stretched before them, a vast expanse of sage and sand beneath the afternoon sun. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada rose like the spine of some sleeping giant, their peaks still crowned with last winter's snow. It was beautiful country in its harsh way, country that had killed many men and would kill many more. They rode in silence for the first mile, conserving their energy for what lay ahead. Agnes kept Mercy at a steady trot, fast enough to make progress, but slow enough not to jostle Rourke's wound too badly. Even so, she could feel him growing weaker as the miles passed, his body sagging more heavily against hers. Talk to me, she said. Keep yourself awake. What do you want to talk about? Tell me about your family, the real story, not the version you told me before. Rourke was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, the voice of a man returning to memories he had tried to bury. We came over in '52, my parents, my brother, and me. Patrick was 9, I was 14. The famine had taken everything else, but we still had each other. He shifted slightly in the saddle, wincing at the movement. Died bought land in California with money he had scraped together over years. 100 acres in the San Joaquin Valley. Good land, fertile land. We were going to be farmers, Americans, living the dream everyone talked about. What happened? The railroad happened. Central Pacific wanted our land for a junction point. They offered to buy it, but the price was an insult. They refused. So they started pressuring us. First it was legal challenges, claims that our deed was not valid. Then it was threats, men showing up in the night telling us to leave. Agnes felt him tense against her. One night in '68, they came with torches, burned the house of the barn, everything we had built over 16 years. Ma got caught in the fire. She lived but barely. Da held on long enough to sign the papers they put in front of him. Then he walked out to the barn that was not there anymore, and he put a gun in his mouth. I am sorry. Do not be. It was a long time ago. But his voice said otherwise. Patrick and I, we swore revenge. We started small, robbing railroad payroll shipments, destroying track. But it grew. It always grows. Before long, we were just another gang of outlaws, and the cause we had started with was just an excuse for the violence. And your mother. She died 3 years after Da. Broken heart, the doctor said. I think she just could not live with what her sons had become. They rode on. The sun climbed toward its zenith, then began its slow descent toward the mountains. Agnes calculated the time in her head. 3 hours until the gold shipment reached Devil's Pass. 3 hours to cover 8 miles of rough terrain and somehow convince a violent outlaw to abandon his life's work. It was not enough time. It would have to be. What about you? Rourke asked suddenly. Your family. Gone. The famine took my parents and 2 brothers. I came over alone in '47. How old? 18. That is too young to be alone in the world. It was old enough to survive. Agnes paused. I met Michael on the ship. He was from Cork too, heading to America to start a new life. We fell in love before we even saw land. The man who died at Antietam. Yes. And that is why you became a nun. That is part of it. Agnes thought about how much to reveal, then decided it did not matter anymore. After he died, I lost my faith. Not in God exactly, but in the goodness of the world. I finished the war, came west, tried to start over. But everywhere I went, I saw the same cruelty, the same violence, the same disregard for human life. So you retreated behind convent walls. I found a place where my skills could do some good, where I could help people without having to decide who deserved helping and who did not. The rules of the church gave me structure, gave me purpose, gave you a way to hide. Agnes felt her jaw tighten. Perhaps. I am not judging, sister. I hid too in my own way. Behind the gang, behind the mission, behind the hate. We all find our walls. The question is whether we are brave enough to tear them down. Before Agnes could respond, Rourke suddenly tensed. Stop. She pulled Mercy to a halt. What is it? Riders, coming from the east. Agnes scanned the horizon but saw nothing. Are you certain? I can feel them, in the ground. He paused. 2, maybe 3, moving fast. They were on a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. To the left of a cluster of boulders offered potential cover. To the right, the land sloped down into open desert where they would be exposed. The rocks, Agnes said. Now. She guided Mercy toward the boulders, slipping from the saddle and helping Rourke down. His legs buckled as they hit the ground, and she had to half carry him into the shadow of the largest rock. The horse, he gasped. She will give us away. Agnes led Mercy behind the rocks and tied her to a scrubby bush. The mare would not be hidden from anyone who looked closely, but from a distance she might blend with the terrain. Then they waited. The hoofbeats grew louder, coming from the direction of town. Agnes pressed herself against the rock face, one hand on the revolver beneath her habit. She had not drawn it yet. She hoped she would not have to. 2 riders came into view, moving fast. They were not wearing badges, not dressed like lawmen. Their clothes were rough, their faces hard. One of them carried a rifle across his saddle. They passed within 50 yards of the boulders, close enough for Agnes to see the dust on their boots, close enough to hear them talking. Patrick says to check the north road. Make sure the shipment stays on schedule. What about Tom? Silas found him. He is at the convent just like we thought. Patrick will deal with him after the job. And the nuns? A pause. Then Patrick does not leave loose ends. The words hung in the air as the riders continued past their hooves, fading into the distance. Agnes felt the blood drain from her face. You heard them, Rourke said. His voice was barely a whisper. After the robbery, Patrick is coming for me. And for everyone who helped me. Yes. You should turn back. Take me to the sheriff. Let him deal with this. There is no reason for you to risk your life. Agnes thought about it. She thought about Ruth and the other sisters, about Father Dominic, about the quiet life she had built over 20 years. She thought about the rules that said she should protect herself, protect her community, let the authorities handle criminals. And then she thought about Michael, about the choice she had made at Antietam, about 20 years of hiding behind rules because she was too afraid to make another decision. No, she said, we keep going. You are going to get yourself killed. Perhaps, but if I turn back now, people will die anyway. The men on the shipment, the sisters at the convent, you. She met his eyes. I am tired of watching people die while I follow rules. I followed the rules at Antietam, and it cost me everything. I will not make that mistake again. Rourke stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Help me up. We still have 3 miles to cover. They rode on the sun sinking lower toward the mountains. Devil's Pass was a narrow corridor between 2 steep ridges, perhaps 100 yards long and 50 yards wide at its broadest point. The wagon road ran straight through the middle, the only route for heavy vehicles traveling between Virginia City and the settlements to the south. It was a perfect place for an ambush. Agnes and Rourke approached from the north, following a game trail that wound up the eastern ridge. From above, they could see the whole pass spread out before them. The wagon road, the boulders that lined its edges, the positions where men with rifles could hide unseen. And they could see Patrick's men already in place. 5 figures crouched among the rocks, their rifles gleaming in the late afternoon light. They were positioned to catch the shipment in a crossfire with no escape route and no cover. It would be a massacre. There, Rourke said, pointing. The tall one on the left, that is Patrick. Agnes followed his gesture. The man he indicated was standing apart from the others, scanning the road with a spyglass. He was younger than Thomas Leaner, with the same dark hair, but a harder cast to his features. Even from a distance, there was something coiled about him, something ready to strike. How do we get down there without being shot? We do not. You stay here. I go alone. You can barely stand. I can stand well enough. Rourke grimaced as he shifted his weight. Patrick will not shoot me on sight. He will want to talk first to understand why I betrayed him. That gives me time. Time for what? To say what needs to be said, to make him see what we have become. He paused. And if that does not work, to buy you enough time to ride back to town and warn the sheriff. Agnes shook her head. I am not leaving you. Yes, you are, because that is the only way this works. If I can convince Patrick to stand down, we all walk away. If I cannot, he met her eyes. Someone needs to survive. Someone needs to tell the story. The real story, not the one that will be written by whoever wins. Agnes felt tears prick at her eyes, an unfamiliar sensation. She had not cried in 20 years. I will not let you die alone. I will not be alone. God will be with me. He smiled, a strange, peaceful expression on a face that had known so much violence. Father Dominic gave me absolution conditional on making things right. This is how I make things right. Before Agnes could respond, the distant sound of wheels reached their ears. The gold shipment was coming. From their vantage point on the ridge, they watched the wagon train emerge from the south. 3 heavy wagons, each pulled by a team of 4 horses. 15 mounted guards, just as Rourke had said, their rifles at the ready, but their postures relaxed. They did not know they were riding into death. Go now, Rourke said, while they are focused on the shipment. I am going with you. Agnes. My name is Agnes O'Malley, and I did not survive the Great Famine and the Civil War, and 20 years in the Nevada desert to hide behind a rock while a good man dies. She reached beneath her habit and drew the revolver Father Dominic had given her. I am coming with you. Rourke looked at the gun in her hand, at the determination in her eyes. You are a stubborn woman, Agnes O'Malley. I am an Irish woman. It is the same thing. Despite everything, he laughed. They made their way down the ridge together, Rourke leaning heavily on Agnes's shoulder. The loose rock shifted beneath their feet, threatening to betray their presence with every step. Below, Patrick's men remained focused on the approaching wagons, unaware of the 2 figures descending toward them. They reached the floor of the pass just as the first wagon entered the kill zone. Patrick, Rourke called out, his voice stronger than Agnes had expected. Patrick, do not do this. Everything stopped. The men on the rocks turned rifles, swinging toward the new threat. The wagon drivers pulled their horses to a halt, confused by the sudden commotion. And Patrick Rourke stepped out from behind his boulder, his face a mask of disbelief. Tom. He took a step forward, then another. What in God's name are you doing here? Stopping you before you do something you cannot undo. Patrick's expression hardened. Silas said you lost your nerve, said you rode off to warn someone. Silas shot me in the back before I could get clear. Your loyal right hand tried to kill your brother. Patrick's eyes flicked to Silas, who stood frozen among the rocks. Is that true? He is lying, Silas said, trying to save his own skin. I am dying, Silas. I have nothing left to save. Rourke took a step forward, Agnes still supporting him. Look at me, Patrick. Look at what I have become. Look at what we have both become. We became what they made us. No, we became what we chose to be. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that we had a choice. We forgot that vengeance would not bring Ma and Da back. We forgot that blood only begets more blood. Patrick shook his head. You do not get to lecture me, Tom. You started this. You made me what I am. I know, and I am sorry. More sorry than you will ever know. Rourke's voice cracked. But it is not too late, not for you. Let these men pass. Walk away from this life while you still can. And then what? Turn myself in, spend the rest of my days in a prison cell. Live. Find something worth living for besides hate. Patrick was silent for a long moment. Agnes watched his face, saw the war being fought behind his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, she thought he might listen. Then Silas moved. Agnes saw the rifle come up, saw it swing toward Thomas. 20 years of instinct took over. She raised the revolver and fired. The shot caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as he fell. The world erupted into chaos. Patrick's men opened fire on the wagon guards. The guards fired back. Horses screamed and bolted. Men shouted and cursed and died. And in the middle of it all, Agnes stood with a smoking gun in her hand, watching Thomas Rourke collapse to the ground. She ran to him, dropping to her knees in the dust. Blood was seeping through his bandages, again the wound torn open by the exertion of the descent. Thomas, Thomas, stay with me. His eyes fluttered open. Did you shoot him? Yes. Good. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. I never liked Silas anyway. Around them, the gunfight was dying down. The wagon guards had retreated to defensive positions, and Patrick's men were pinned down among the rocks. No one was advancing. No one was winning. And Patrick was walking toward them. He moved through the chaos like a ghost, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past his head. His eyes were fixed on Thomas, on the brother who lay bleeding in the dust. Why? Patrick demanded, his voice raw. Why did you have to come here? Why could you not just let me finish what we started? Because it was wrong, Patrick. It was always wrong. We convinced ourselves otherwise. Patrick knelt beside his brother, his rifle hanging, forgotten, at his side. I watched Da put a gun in his mouth. I watched Ma wither away to nothing. I watched you ride off into the hills and become someone I did not recognize. And through all of it, I told myself it was worth it, that we were fighting for something. We were fighting for revenge. That is not the same as fighting for something. Tears streamed down Patrick's face. Then what was it all for? 13 years of blood and death. What was any of it for? Thomas reached up and gripped his brother's hand. It does not matter what it was for. What matters is what happens next. Patrick looked around at the destruction, the overturned wagons, the wounded men, the horses standing riderless in the settling dust. He looked at Silas bleeding on the ground, at the nun kneeling beside his brother with a gun still in her hand. And something in him seemed to break. I cannot go to prison, Tom. I cannot spend my life in a cell. You do not have to. Just let them pass. Let the wounded be tended to, and then ride away. Disappear. Find somewhere far from here and start again. They will hunt me. Let them hunt. You are a Rourke. We are hard to kill. Patrick laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. Then he stood, raised his voice to carry across the pass. Stand down, all of you. Stand down. One by one, the guns fell silent. Patrick walked to where Silas lay groaning in the dust. He looked down at the man who had betrayed his brother, who had nearly killed him with a bullet in the back. You shot Tom. Silas tried to speak, but Patrick raised his rifle and fired a single shot. Then he turned to the remaining men of his gang. We are done here. Mount up and ride out. Now. The outlaws exchanged confused glances, but no one argued. Within minutes, they had gathered their horses and were disappearing into the gathering dusk. Patrick walked back to where Thomas lay. This is goodbye, then? For now, maybe not forever. Maybe. Patrick looked at Agnes. Take care of him, sister. He is the only family I have left. Then he was gone, riding south into the darkness, leaving behind everything he had spent 13 years building. Agnes watched him go, the revolver still warm in her hand. Did it count? Thomas whispered. Redemption. Agnes looked down at him, at the outlaw who had become something else in the space of 3 days. You gave your brother a chance to choose different. That is more than most people ever get. Thomas smiled. Tell Father Dominic, I will see him soon, for that absolution. You will tell him yourself you are not dying today. She signaled to the wagon guards who were emerging cautiously from their defensive positions. I need help here. This man needs a doctor. And as the stars began to appear overhead, as the dust settled and the wounded were gathered and the long night began, Agnes O'Malley held the hand of a dying outlaw and prayed that she had made the right choice. For the first time in 20 years, the words came easily.